What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be talking about the bizarre death of Christopher Case. As y'all know, I've been rebooting a lot of my videos. I have about 4 or 5 left. Thank you so much for being so patient with me, so supportive of me. I have so much new content coming out soon as well, so I've been trying to stick to my usual 2 a week. In the coming weeks, it's going to be 3 most likely. And once the reboots are done, you know, we'll have a lot more new content. But I hope you look at these reboots as new, because I know a lot of you didn't see the originals. And I've also been adding some information in here and there when I can, if there's updated information or anything like that. So let's jump right in. Christopher Case, bizarre death by witchcraft and shadow people. Disclaimer, because Christopher is unfortunately deceased, all of this information is coming from first-hand accounts told by his best friend Sammy, and also a couple of his friends who chose to remain anonymous, of conversations they had with him the week leading up to when he died. Christopher Case was an elevator music executive in the 1990s. The story takes place in 1999. Christopher lived in Seattle at the time in the 1300 block of North 152nd Avenue in North King County. He was kind of a fitness buff, happy-go-lucky, easygoing. He had tons of friends. He was just a really popular, friendly, outgoing guy. I wish I knew his birthday. I'm thinking fire sign, but I could be wrong. He was extremely physically fit, as I said, and he really took great care in his appearance. Despite his amazing personality, really good looks, and great career, Christopher was single at the time, and that was by choice. He preferred staying at home and just listening to ancient Egyptian music, which was somewhat of an obsession for him. It was more than a hobby. He loved ancient Egyptian music. Christopher really wasn't looking for love or even looking to really date anyone at this point in his life. He was very career-oriented, career-focused at this time. He was young and kind of keeping to himself. He traveled a lot for work too, and this all takes place when Christopher took a business trip to California. And while there, on April 11th, 1999, he decided to go out to the San Francisco area with his friends who were there with him because they were also his co-workers. One of the co-workers decided to bring along a female friend that lived in the San Francisco Bay Area and who he had known for a while. He invited her out with Christopher and the other guy, and they all just were going to hang out together. He introduced this woman to Chris and the other guy, and they all just had a good time for the most part. This woman, by all accounts, was extremely attractive, like gorgeous where the men couldn't take their eyes off of her. She was described later on by Christopher as, quote, very intense looking, end quote, but she was about 20 years older than him, and he was 35 at the time. So the 4 of them talked all night. They had some drinks, some food. They kind of just hung out. They had a great evening. This woman and Chris actually found that they had something in common. And bizarrely enough, she was also really, really obsessively into ancient Egyptian music. I mean, what are the odds, right? Even though he really enjoyed being able to share and talk about his greatest and main hobby with someone who loved and enjoyed ancient Egyptian music just as much as he did, he was still only looking at this woman platonically. At the end of the night, the woman asked Chris if he wanted to go back to her place with him, and him realizing that she may have gotten the wrong idea, maybe he had come off as a little bit flirty because of his excitement about their shared interests. I'm sure he didn't come across many people who had that exact hobby and interest, you know? So realizing that she was taking his friendliness and kindness the wrong way, he was not interested in her romantically, and he didn't want to lead her on, so he politely declined. This is when Chris later said the woman started becoming very pushy and kind of trying to force the issue, telling him they didn't have to have sex, they didn't have to do anything but sit and talk about ancient Egyptian music and listen to it. but she had this vibe about her now that was pushy, aggressive, and demanding. And Chris, once again, very firmly stated that he did not want to go back to her place with her, and he just wanted to go back to his hotel, to which she became very obviously irritated and annoyed, and possibly even angry. According to Chris, after she started getting super aggressive and pushy, he started getting really uncomfortable as he was trying to be polite and decline her offer in a way that didn't hurt her feelings. But now he was getting like annoyed and she wouldn't take no for an answer. So he told his friends, like, look, I'm just going back to the hotel. I've had enough. And he cheerfully said goodnight to everyone, including this mystery woman. As he stood up, this beautiful, charming, and friendly woman suddenly became very visibly angry. She pulled Chris in close as he went to shake her hand, and she whispered in his ear, quote, "I'm a witch. I'm going to put a curse on you, and you will die by the end of this week," end quote. Now, she whispered this to him, so nobody else heard it. Although taken aback, Chris turned and left without another word, and the next day on April 12, 1999, he and his co-workers flew back home to Seattle, Washington. Once Chris got home, he called his best friend Sammy to talk about the trip, the work he was doing, and also the bizarre encounter with the woman. Sammy was an old friend, and she wasn't only a teacher, but she was also a psychic. Understand here that by all accounts, Chris was not religious, nor was he superstitious in any way. He was totally skeptical. He did not believe in any of it. So to him, a woman claiming to be a witch and putting a curse on him did not faze him at all. And he chalked it up to the woman being drunk and kind of annoyed that she was turned down, because she was very attractive, very beautiful, very charming. She probably didn't get turned down often. So he didn't believe in it at all, but he just thought it was kind of a funny story of a drunken night that he had had and some crazy weird woman, and he called Sammy to recount it and laugh about it. Maybe subconsciously he was trying to get some reassurance from her. She didn't take it very seriously either, and again, they chalked it up to the woman maybe having had a little bit too much to drink and feeling rejected. About 48 hours after the encounter, however, this is when strange things started going on. On April 13th, 1999, Chris later told friends this is when he first started hearing whispering coming from outside of his bedroom near the front door of his small apartment. He lived alone, he did not have any pets, he did not have any roommates. Also, from the time he got home from his trip to this evening on the 13th, everything had been perfectly normal, nothing crazy, nothing strange had happened. He had pretty much put the woman and the whole spell thing out of his mind after recounting it to Sammy and possibly some friends. So he heard this whispering that was starting and stopping and seeming to be coming from kind of the front door area, but not being superstitious or paranoid in any way. He chalked it up to being overtired from the flight and all the working. He had been working overtime, so he decided to go and get some sleep. As he laid down to go to bed, though, as soon as he turned the lights off and got into bed and kind of covered up in the blankets, this is when he heard the whispering get even louder, but it was coming from all the way across the apartment from where the front door was. So it had moved. This is when he started thinking that maybe someone had broken into his house and he was being burgled. With this thought in mind, Chris got up out of bed and went to where he heard the whispering now, which was coming from the laundry room. But as soon as he got to the laundry room and flipped on the lights, the house was completely silent again. At this point, Chris was standing still and being very quiet, trying to see if he heard any further noises, whispering, anything that would insinuate that his house was being burglarized. He didn't hear anything, and laughing to himself out of being so paranoid over nothing, how overtired he was that he was getting himself all worked up thinking he was hearing whispering, he kind of chuckled and turned off the light in the laundry room and went to walk back into his bedroom to go to sleep. However, as he was walking, Christopher saw out of his periffs something move. He later described it as a dark shadow, and it ran from one side of the room to the other. Out of the corner of his eye, though, by the time he turned to look, it was gone. Where he saw it was coming from by the front door, which is the first place he had heard the whispering earlier in the night. At this point, Chris decides that he really is being burgled, and he goes to turn on all the lights in the apartment, which, as I stated previously, was a very small apartment. So he could stand in one spot and see the entire apartment as long as the bedroom door was open and the bathroom door. Like, as long as the doors were open, he could see everything from where he was standing in the kitchen. So that's what he did. He turned on all the lights, opened all the doors, and stood there trying to catch this burglar. Keep in mind, he's looking for a human being at this point. He is in no way thinking supernatural. He doesn't believe in that kind of stuff. Right when he's standing there with all the lights on, kind of looking and listening for this burglar, Chris starts hearing the whispering again. So at this point, standing in the middle of the room and being very silent and listening intently, trying to catch this burglar if there was one. But again, he started hearing the whispering again now. Only this time, it's coming from everywhere, all at once. Just this whispering totally surrounding him like a surround sound stereo speaker coming from every single nook and cranny of the house, every single room. And it's just whispering that's blaring in his ears. Chris then decides to walk through and search each room, each closet, under the bed, search every crevice. Because for some reason, I guess I'm not a skeptic at all, so I don't really understand how he couldn't think supernatural at this point, but he wasn't. He's still looking for a human. The whispering at this point, though, was kind of secondary because he's still thinking that there's a human being in his house that could possibly hurt, mug, or murder him as they're robbing his house. Does the person obviously knows that he's there? He's thinking this in his head, right? So he's not really even focused on the whispering. He's more thinking of the person, the shadow he saw run past his peripheral vision earlier. So after searching every crevice, closet, under the bed, every spare inch of this small apartment, Chris goes again and stands in one spot and looks again, waiting to see something out of the corner of his eye. And this is when he realizes that he's in fact alone in the house and chalks it up to he must have been seeing and hearing things because he's overtired, stressed, and overworked, even though he didn't feel stressed. He thought maybe all of the work, being a music executive at 35 years old, like maybe he was just super stressed and needed to really get some sleep. Unfortunately, though, Chris did not get any sleep that night because the whispers never stopped all night long. He spent all night, hours upon hours, just chasing the whisper. He'd hear it in the laundry room, the bathroom, the living room, and he would just go from room to room, turning on lights, stopping, listening, then it would move, and then he would go across the apartment. He did this all night long. He was also still seeing shadows in his periffs. Every room that he went into, he would see it. And any time he tried to look them dead on, like turn towards them when he just saw them at a corner of his eye, there would be nothing and no one there. I mean, at this point, he's got to be thinking he's going nuts. Still not thinking supernatural, still not thinking paranormal. Still somehow not thinking about the witch's curse. On the next morning, April 14th, Chris decided to call Sammy. All of this information that I just gave you and most of what I'm about to give you comes from Sammy, and she recounted it to the police later on about all the conversations she had had with Chris from the time he got back from his trip to the time of his death. So anyway, the morning of April 14th, Chris calls Sammy and he's completely panicked. She said she had never heard him like this before, as he recounted to her what had happened to him the night before when he stayed up all night chasing down whispers and shadows in his apartment. Sammy later stated that she was worried right from the beginning because it was so incredibly unlike Chris to be freaking out over really anything. He was this really calm and patient kind of guy, very easygoing, very laid back. So for him to be panicked about anything, especially stuff like whispers and shadow people, which he didn't even believe in, paranormal activity, if you will, it was really concerning for her. Sammy actually described Christopher as terrified. Being the stand-up guy as he was, and again, not believing in this, he didn't want to call the police because what would he tell them? Would he tell them he was hearing random phantom whispers and seeing shadow people out of his peripheral vision? He knew how insane that sounded, and Sammy tried to reassure him and just hoped that whatever had happened the night before, whatever it was, did not happen again, and poor Chris could get some rest and some peace. She was extremely concerned at this point. They eventually got off the phone, and this was the late 90s, so keep in mind there were only landline phones back then. That night, the same thing happened again. As soon as Chris turned off the lights to go to sleep, the whispering started. As soon as he would turn on a light in a room to search for where the whispering was coming from, the whispering would move to across the house where he would go and turn on the light. It was just the same thing. Every time he would turn off the lights and try to go to sleep and give up, the whispering and the noises would start up, and he had to get up and do it all over again. And keep in mind, he's sleep deprived because he hadn't slept the night before either, because he was up chasing whispers and shadow people. So now he's thinking that he's overtired, so his mind's playing tricks on him. He's still not thinking supernatural. The difference this night, though, is these shadow people that Christopher was seeing the night before in his peripheral vision, he was actually starting to see them in a human form, like the black shadow silhouette of a person. And because everything was becoming more and more vivid as the night progressed, the shadows were becoming more and more human, the whispering was becoming more and more clear, even though he still couldn't make out what it was, what they were saying, the whispers. He really, at this point, thought his mind was playing tricks on him. He was overworked, overstressed, lack of sleep from the night before. He thought all of this was making him have these extremely realistic delusions and hallucinations. He spent his second night chasing these things throughout the apartment and once again got no sleep whatsoever. So 2 nights now in a row, no sleep. The next day, on April 15th, Chris decided to call a few more of his friends and recount the same exact thing he had been recounting to Sammy about what was going on in his apartment with the whispers, the shadow people, and the humanoid silhouettes. These friends later chose to remain anonymous, but they did kind of verify Sammy's story of what Christopher was telling her this whole time, from when he got home, the 48 hours after he got home, up until this point. All of them stated that whether they believed him or not, they believed that he believed that this was really going on, and whatever he was experiencing, whether it was actually happening and supernatural paranormal, or whether it was his mind playing tricks on him because of sleep deprivation and stress, they were very concerned because whatever it was absolutely terrifying Chris. And he just wasn't that guy. Very level-headed guy, Chris was. So on the night of the 15th, Chris decided, and he was determined that he was getting some sleep that night. Like, that was it. It was just his mind playing tricks on him. He needed to ignore it as best he could and go to sleep. He was admittedly on the verge of delirium anyways from lack of sleep. Unfortunately, things were about to get much worse for poor Christopher Case. Eventually, Chris was able to fall asleep that night, probably from pure exhaustion, despite the whispering that he was hearing again. Only he woke up suddenly in the middle of the night and was completely paralyzed. He could not move anything but his eyeballs. Keep in mind, too, it's the middle of the night. It is pitch black. So he wakes up after experiencing all of this activity the past few nights, getting no sleep, and he is completely immobile except for his eyes. The whispering starts up again, and it moves from outside his bedroom door to directly under his bed, and he can't move. Christopher, who was never a religious man and didn't even know what he believed in when it came to that kind of stuff, started praying because now he's thinking, with this whispering being directly under his bed, he's starting to think of the shadow entities, the humanoids that he has been seeing running throughout his apartment. He's thinking, can one possibly be under my bed? All of a sudden, out of the corner of his eye, he sees something coming up from under his bed next to him. He moves his eyes only because that's all he can do, and he looks over and sees the full-figured apparition of a shadow person appear right next to his bed. He can't see any features or anything, but he definitely, from what he can get a glimpse of from only being able to move his eyes, knows that it's that shadow, human-shaped thing that he had been seeing running through his apartment the past couple of nights. This is just terrifying for me to even think about encountering. I suffer from sleep paralysis. That is not what this was. He was fully awake. So this shadow figure being thing is standing right over him, just hovering and lurking over his paralyzed body. And all of a sudden, too, while he sits there completely helpless to do anything but move his eyes, the thing reaches down and grabs hold of Chris's neck and begins to choke him. Chris is being choked and he can't breathe, but he can't fight back because he can't move. This is when this being, this shadow entity, starts lifting Christopher off of the bed by his neck and throat. He had no concept of time, obviously, being petrified, terrified as he was, so he didn't know if it was minutes or seconds when he later recounted the story to Sammy and other friends. But eventually, the shadow person just let him go and walked through his bedroom door and disappeared into thin air. He was gasping for air, grabbing his throat, trying to catch his breath, and he just laid there wondering, like, knowing for sure in his gut that this thing was going to come back and kill him. Eventually, though, probably just out of pure adrenaline rush and crashing, Chris was able to go back to sleep that night, and he did sleep until the morning. When Christopher wakes up the next morning, he sees some kind of incisions on his fingers, on all 10 of them, one for each finger, and it's like the tips of each finger had been cut off and sliced. He was profusely bleeding. He had these cuts all over his fingertips. So he knows it's his own blood. Everything's covered in blood. The bed's full of blood. And he goes to the bathroom, and while he's trying to bandage up his fingers, he sees in the mirror that he has marks and bruises going down his entire neck. And you can see a handprint of bruises and scratches and all kinds of marks. Pretty much the physical evidence that what had happened to him the night before with this shadow entity had been real, and also it or something else paranormal or supernatural had done something to Christopher's fingertips as well. Oh my God, this is so freaking scary. So this is the morning of April 16th, 1999, and Chris, seeing all these bruises and marks on his neck, these incisions on his hands, everything comes back to him the night before about being paralyzed, the whispering, the shadow entity choking him, and he realizes it was not sleep paralysis, it wasn't a nightmare, it happened for real. At this point, he was terrified, obviously, and fearing for his life. He decided to call Sammy, and he was just in a state of complete terror, confusion, anxiety, stress. And Sammy said this made her absolutely terrified too, because of the terror and fear in Christopher's voice as he recounted what had happened to him. She said she was speechless. She said that Christopher was so terrified and panicked that he could barely articulate what had happened, but when he finally did, she said if it were anybody other than Chris, level-headed Chris, straight-thinking Chris, she wouldn't have believed it. And that's really saying something because she's a psychic, but she said because it was Chris and she knew him as a human being, as a person, and she knew that how he sounded was enough to make her believe, she believed every word of it. Sammy said she tried to get Christopher to calm down and to call the police, but he reiterated that he would sound like a crazy person. What was he going to say? He was hearing random, unintelligible whispering and got attacked by a shadow person in the middle of the night while he was paralyzed. Like, what would he say? He decided not to call the police because, again, how far was he going to get with this story? So finally, at this point, it dawns on Christopher Case that perhaps the woman he met and rejected in San Francisco was in fact a witch who did in fact put a curse on him. He says, forget this, and decides he's not going to take it lying down and decides to go and do some research. He was known, again, as being very reasonable, very rational, so in doing all of this research by himself, he thought he could avoid too many people knowing about what was going on. He told a couple of close friends, the anonymous friends, and Sammy. He didn't want his reputation being some kind of paranoid freak in his mind who believed in this kind of stuff, you know? So he figured he'd do his own research and investigate and see how to get a spell broken to see if that was possibly what he's experiencing were the symptoms of some kind of witchcraft spell or spell in general. He was also very high up in his company. He was an executive, and he feared that his reputation would take a huge hit and his position may take a huge hit if it got out that he was running around, researching all of this or chasing shadow people and whispers. Chris went to a local bookstore and obtained some books about demonic possession, the occult, witchcraft, all that kind of stuff. He purchased a huge bunch of books. He bought anywhere from 10 to 15 crucifixes, and after doing some research in his apartment, he ended up putting the crucifixes all over the walls and in every single room of the apartment. He poured salt along the baseboards of his entire apartment in every single corner, crevice, baseboard of every single room in the place, like one long line that was not broken. He then took the same salt and poured a little pile of it in each corner of every room, in every corner of the entire apartment. In his utter fear, terror, panic, and desperation, he had read that doing this in case of demonic possession and entities, witchcrafts, and spells, this would help to keep these entities and these things out and perhaps break the curse on him. He was just trying to protect himself until he could figure out what exactly was going on and how to put a stop to it. So we're up to the night of April 16th, and nobody knows exactly what happened that night to trigger this, but what we do know is that Christopher Case left his apartment in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on his back, running out of his apartment and checked into a hotel. The next morning, April 17th, Sammy decided to call Christopher to check up on him. He didn't answer because he was at the hotel and there were only landline phones, but she didn't know he was at the hotel. So that's why he didn't answer. He did not get the message right away. He didn't have time to tell anyone. That's how quickly he left. He didn't even grab any of his belongings as far as I could find. Keep in mind here that Sammy had been speaking to Christopher the past few nights about everything that was going on, and he was getting more and more stressed and paranoid and panicked and terrified as the nights were wearing on, and he wasn't getting sleep too. So when he didn't answer, she was pretty worried, and she was actually in a panic, and she called the other friends who knew what was going on, the couple anonymous friends, and they all agreed that a welfare check would probably be the best thing to do. So Sammy did hang up with them and call the police. The police did go to Christopher's apartment, but they knocked on the door and he didn't answer. And when they listened by the door, everything sounded quiet. Obviously, Chris was at the hotel. And they called Sammy back and said all was quiet at the apartment and they could not break in or anything like that, just for a welfare check if everything was quiet and they didn't hear anything suspicious sounding or dangerous sounding going on in the place. Sammy figured there was nothing else she could do at that point, so she did go to work, and when she got home, she had a voicemail from Chris from earlier in the day when she was at work. Sammy, seeing that there was nothing else she could do, went to work that day, and when she got home, she had a voicemail from Chris on her landline phone. She said that the past few days he had sounded nothing but terrified and panicked, and on the voicemail, he sounded defeated. He told her that he was under attack and he was going to die that night and that he nor anyone else could do anything about it. She said he sounded so just calm and accepting of it as if it were fact, as though he recognized it as absolute. He was going to die. He couldn't do anything about it. She didn't know what had happened, which had let him know this so intently and deeply, or who he had spoken to. He didn't say any of that. And nobody knows what changed his demeanor, what made him know he was going to die and just accept it and just be defeated and take it as fate. So Sammy, still not knowing that Chris is at the hotel, tries to call him back that night. He doesn't answer. And while she's extremely panicked, she doesn't know what to do because she feels like if she calls the police back, it hasn't even been 24 hours. They're probably not going to do a second welfare check. So she decides to deal with it in the morning and get some sleep. So this brings us to the morning of April 18th, 1999, which is 7 days after he met the woman who claimed she was a witch and put a curse on him. Word got back to Sammy through the anonymous mutual friends that Christopher had not shown up for work that morning and nobody had been able to get a hold of him. Nobody had seen or heard from him that entire day. She called the police back and explained the entire situation of him missing work, no one having seen or heard from him, and the police did go back to knock on the front door of Chris's apartment for the welfare check. The door to the apartment was ajar when they got there, so they were allowed to go in, and they wanted to walk inside and check and make sure everything was all right. The police later stated that they weren't sure what to think about the strangeness of Chris's apartment. Remember, he had piles of salt in the corners. He had crucifixes all over the walls. He had candles burning everywhere. He had not gotten rid of any of those things because he was using them to try and protect himself from whatever was attacking him in the past week. Even though he went to the motel or the hotel, he still had these things at his house. On top of the tons of candles and everything else, they also found little messages scattered all over his house, which were later to be determined to be written in Christopher's handwriting. And it was all little notes that were supposedly little kind of spells and sayings that were to ward off demons and witches and curses, etc., things like that. After seeing all these random and seemingly very bizarre items and things scattered all around Christopher's apartment, the police decided to just finish searching the house, the apartment, and get the heck out of there. However, this is when they ended up finding his dead body in the bathtub. When they found him, Chris Case was fully clothed in a waterless bathtub, which was surrounded by dozens of burnt out candles, dozens of crucifixes. He was also in an odd position. He was found kneeling kind of as if he were praying. His hands were in prayer position and pushed up against his chest. And he was on his knees. So he was kneeling in prayer. There were no obvious external injuries, and the coroner ended up concluding that Christopher Case had died of, quote, natural causes, end quote. Basically a heart attack. Needless to say, Chris's friends and family were not buying this, and they desperately tried to get the police and even the coroner to listen to what Christopher had been telling them had been going on the past 7 days, starting with the woman he met, the alleged curse she put on him, and everything that Christopher had been going through for the past week, begging them to reopen the investigation into his death because they were pretty sure it was a murder. But, I mean, murder by witchcraft, murder by shadow people. Even as someone whose job it is to look into paranormal things and to research the paranormal and also to research true crime, I can see how that could be how one would be very skeptical of that. What's very strange to me is that no information ever came to light about the woman who had allegedly put this hex or curse or spell or whatever on Chris. Now, I never understood this. If she was a friend of Chris's coworker and that's why she was out with them that night, wouldn't he have had her phone number for someone to contact? Chris didn't want his coworkers to know what he was going through for fear of his position, or his reputation at work being tarnished or losing his high position and status at his job. But wouldn't afterwards somebody reach out to this guy and be like, hey, what is this woman's name? Where does she live? What's her phone number? We need to check her out. Nobody ever thought to call this woman. Even Christopher, I don't know if he didn't think to call her or if he didn't want to call the friend to get her number to explain what was going on. He could have lied and told the friend he decided he was interested in her. I don't understand why this woman was never brought back up again. Ever. Never investigated by not only the police, but by family or friends either. And the coworker knew her. And the coworker was also a friend of his. So why? I just don't get it. To this day, this case is still considered a death by natural causes. A 35-year-old who was extremely physically fit, ate healthy, exercised daily, took really great care of himself, and took pride in his physical appearance and his fitness routine, and died of a heart attack? I mean, does that even make sense? And again, I wonder, if this woman knew Chris's hobby was ancient Egyptian music and she just kind of said that was her hobby because she wanted to be with him or put some kind of spell on him. I don't know, guys. Let me know what you think or what you know about this case. Make sure to leave a comment below. Give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed hanging out with me. This case is very strange. It's very scary because it's true. It's a documented case. Christopher Case is a real person. This is how he died, and this is reportedly what happened to him in the week leading up to his death. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and share if you think this video is worth sharing. Be sure, please, to check out the description box for some important links. My Patreon, if you want to join. I do some Patreon only content, but I only have a few patrons right now. So I try to do early access to videos and little kind of shorties when I can. Once I get more patrons, I will definitely be doing a lot of Patreon only content. I actually have a lot of ideas. So please click that link if you're able to financially support me in the channel. If you want to make a one-time donation for as little or as much as you want through PayPal, my PayPal link is also in the description box. And when you do that, I will give you access to the next Patreon only content when you donate. I really appreciate all my patrons right now and everyone who's donated through PayPal. You guys have no idea, like, it adds up and it really, really helps. I appreciate all of you. If you can't support me or the channel financially, that's fine, because you can support me by liking, subscribing, sharing, commenting, getting the word out, helping me climb to 1,000. I had a great momentum going there and now I'm slowing down again. So guys, just help your girl out in any way that you can. I appreciate all of you so much. I'm going to also try to leave links to mine and Steve Stockton's Sunday night live stream fireside chat with Steve and Gemma in the description box as well. Head on over there every Sunday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific, and I believe it's 12 midnight UK time mostly, but I may have that wrong. So whatever 7 p.m. Eastern Time is in your time zone, come on out, talk to us. You guys are our guest, okay? So we talk to you in the chat. You kind of control the conversation. We're just getting to know you, letting you get to know us. And we totally have a blast. We have our regulars, but we also love seeing new faces come in. So guys, have your best day, have your best night. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to Christopher's case. And be kind. It doesn't cost anything, can gain you so much. Let your kindness show. It is beautiful. It's beautiful. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you next time. Mwah. Bye-bye.